Hello and welcome back to Sketchy Yesteryear. It's been a couple weeks and I will be trying to figure out a good rhythm for uploading content, so do bear with me. Um, I have been away from my home, so actually today I've been drawing with a very old graphics tablet, so I'm not going to do much on-screen drawing because it's a little weird. But I wanted to update everybody on a couple things that I wanted to make sure that people knew about what it looked like around Ollie Brown's house in 1900, the day that her funeral would have occurred. I wanted to have gotten this uploaded sooner, but again, I'm not home because this story about the runaway was published on November 1st, 1900, so exactly 123 years ago. So it would have happened on Halloween. So just as a reminder, this young lady died. She was 19, I think. It said she had a lingering illness. I found out that that was tuberculosis, so that would have been extra sad, I'm sure. And the people who were visiting her funeral were coming out of the house, and some women were talking to each other, and a runaway delivery wagon with one horse was barreling down the sidewalk. And so this is what I'm trying to draw. But it's not just about a carriage, a horse, a man who stopped the horse, and a group of women. It's about where they are. So in researching this, I've been trying to figure out what Ollie Brown's house would have looked like. Also, we're seeing her neighbor's house, and I found a little bit about this neighbor. His name was Egbert Morehouse, which I love that name. And I am going to flip over to his address in the city directory because he was actually an interesting guy all on his own. So just a moment. So in the Portland, Oregon city directory from 1900 to 1901, you can see up here Egbert H. Morehouse, president. And then here's his actual address on East 35th Street. So he is the guy on the corner. So he's their neighbor. But he does have a business downtown selling wallpaper, decorating, painting, etc. And here is their ad. So that's kind of a huge ad. I don't know what it costs to put in an ad that big in the city directory at the time, but it seems like a significant amount to pay. So I think it's safe to say that he was doing fine. And I love this picture because, I don't know if I mentioned last time, but I do come from a fashion history place often. And if you have any interest in kind of the silhouette of women's fashion, here you go. Yeah. So this is a common silhouette that you would have seen in, say, after the mid 1890s, and I even prepared a couple like little illustrations to kind of emphasize that, because when I draw these women coming out of the house, they're not wearing high fashion, but they are wearing recent fashion, I'm sure. And even though it's not super fancy, their corsets and their underpinnings would have been more or less the same shape. And especially you see this woman's bodice is a very particular shape. So that will influence the line of the coats of anybody wearing this shape, or if they're just wearing a jacket or something. It's all relevant. So I'm just going to flip over to my little mini fashion history presentation. So what I did was on archive.org, the Internet Archive, which is the best place. I highly recommend it. I went through and I leafed through some ladies' home journals for a long time in order to get an idea of what the silhouettes were doing and what the sleeves were doing, so that I would know roughly what kind of coats and dresses and silhouettes to expect from a group of working class women at a funeral. So this is from 1894. Earlier in the decade, the bodices were very long and tubular. The waists on these things were super low. You can see that's still kind of true. Ladies' Home Journal I picked because it wasn't super, super fancy, but it would have been kind of an aspirational thing for many women. And as we go through the decade, you also get the rise and deflation of the balloon sleeve. And so again, would any of these mourning women still have had kind of a puffy sleeve? I think that's very possible. And here you get a nice outline of these jackets and these capelets that women would have been wearing. So again, I'm just assuming everything is going to be more pared down than what you see in the catalogs, but still it's a guideline. And by the later 1890s, this is 1898, I think this is a pretty safe silhouette to assume for women. I also decided just to look up generally what kind of boots to expect for shape for the women, even though I think only one woman in my picture even has a toe showing. But you know, it's just something that I find important. So check these out. These are fairly long, elongated, not super pointy, but not pointy. And again, if we go back a couple years, I think it was still fairly pointy. When we get closer to the early 1900s, then things will round out a little bit more again. But I think it's fair to assume that at least one toe in this group can have this kind of shape to it. I also thought that it was important because there's talk of the man who stopped the horse from running into these ladies, that he I think they said he leaned the horse up. He didn't lean the horse up, but anyway, he like pushed the horse up against the fence to stop it from running. So I'm thinking, what does a picket fence look like? And I looked through a couple magazines, and a lot of these picket fences were actually metal, but I figured this is a very humble house. The metal fencing would have been too expensive, so I'll just be drawing your regular run-of-the-mill symbolic picket fence. So with all of that in mind, let's take a look at the tiny progress I've made. So it may not look like much, but since last time I've added some fencing. I've made the house a little bit bigger, changed the perspective, which I think is going to be an ongoing thing. I've moved the carriage and the guy and the horse, and then I'm trying to draw in Mr. Morehouse's house. And his house was the same height as their house, according to the Sanborn maps, but it was longer, so that's going to be another thing. But I have drawn a couple more details on the house based on my very tiny knowledge of Victorian mourning. You know, when you see pictures of like, you know, presidents that have died and like famous people, they went all out with the black crepe festoons and swags. But for a humble working class household, I've read that they might just tie a black crepe bow on the doorknob. They might leave the door slightly ajar so that people could let themselves in. So I'm trying to kind of convey that here in the background. The women I haven't done much to, except for I've moved them forward to even, you know, kind of up the stakes that this horse is about to run into them. And then I've added the fence, like I mentioned, and then I went down a rabbit hole and tried to figure out what the streets were like at the time. You know, were they paved? I didn't think they were paved. So according to this pavement map I found, the streets would have been gravel, and probably, you know, fairly mixed in with that would have been, you know, stuff from the horses. And so this street, when I get it more in, will be bumpy. And then I started putting in a plank sidewalk because I have no reason to believe that the sidewalks this far out would have been paved yet. This was the edge of town at the time. This is 35th. And in Portland, the edge of town was, I believe, 42nd, maybe 41st, but I think 42nd. So this was, I don't know if you'd call it the suburbs, but it was definitely far out there, especially considering that everybody was either walking or taking some kind of horse-drawn conveyance. So with all of that in mind, I hope to post a shorter video soon where I'm actually drawing and talking, but with this little tiny graphics tablet here, it's not going to happen. So thank you for your attention, and I hope you have a great day, and I hope to see you soon. Bye.